working. My joke is always Zanya Zusi Mark Zuckerberg Paul. Oh yeah. Okay. So hold on because we're trying out live streaming on Instagram as well. So let's see if the live stream to Instagram works this time. Yeah. Oh, again, so it is working. Wow. Biba, everything is working for once. All right. Half a day todos hamzo bueno hudzang estigi nuevo na episode Fanachu. Buenas. Inanu si Michaeluhan Bavakwa. And for those of you who are fans of Fanachu, who have been watching Fanachu for a while, listening to Fanachu for quite a while, you have probably not been following Fanachu for as long as our guests today. And so, I'm in my middle age now, but my guest today, we are from the old Chamorro internet. I'm just teasing. So this means that we have had a presence on the Chamorro internet from Blogspot days, people from Guam days, from back in
The
the
good old
time before
days.
social media was social everything. And so my guest today is somebody that, we found each other online when we were both grad students out in the States. And, we've both been scholars, we've both been writers, we've worked on things together. And so I'm very, very excited because he's also one of the earliest followers of the Fanachu podcast, earliest supporters of the Fanachu podcast. And so I always joke that me, Jess Tatwiloff, and then Craig Santos Perez, we are the Sus Maria Jose. We are the first three supporters of the Fanachu podcast when Manny Cruz started it way back in the day. But Craig Santos Perez, who is, Chamorro poet, scholar, the publisher of, the editor of many books, the publisher of many books. And so, from the unincorporated territory series, and of course the winner of a National Book Award last year. Si Zeus Masi Perifinatotmu para Fanachu, I'm so glad to have you on the Fanachu podcast.
Well, Hafadeh Maged, it's an honor to be on the show, and I've been a longtime listener and supporter, and just wanted to also give a shout out to Dr. Manny Cruz for all the work he's done to bring this show to life, and of course, thank you for all the work you do to have kept it going for so long.
Hey, si Zeus Masi, and you are one of the most prolific writers, and so actually, people say that I do a lot, and then every time I feel like I do a lot, I look at your Facebook feed, and then I feel like I'm tinahong, I'm not doing enough. There's no way I'm publishing enough. There's no way I'm doing enough because si Craig. Look at what Craig put out this year. And so because you have published so much, and so we're going to hear some of your poems today. We're going to talk about the National Book Award that you received. We're going to hear some of what you read in your speech, which touched a lot of people both in the Marianas but also sort of across the United States. But I want to give people a chance, though. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Because one of the things, Fanachu is a space for Chamorro conversations, for Chamorro people, but one thing that I always like to remind people is that this is not, Fanachu is a space not just for the Chamorroist of the Chamorros. It's a space for the spectrum of Chamorro possibility, which means for those. So, tell us about your Chamorro identity. Did you grow up in the Marianas? Did you grow up in the diaspora? Have you always had a strong sense of your identity, or is your search for your roots, your language, your heritage something that has driven you? Tell us more of, Hadzi si Craig Santos Perez, por favor.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. A little bit about me. I was born at Guam Memorial Hospital and grew up in the village of Mongmon. I come from a family in Godzu, and lived on Guam until I was 15 years old. And when I was in sophomore in high school, my family migrated to Northern California, where I finished going to high school and attended university undergraduate and as well as grad school. And so, moving as a teenager, of course, I felt very homesick and, just missed home a lot. And so really writing poetry became a way for me to just feel and stay connected to home. I started writing poetry more seriously in graduate school. I attended the Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing program at the University of San Francisco, where I ended up writing the manuscript for my first poetry book, which is all about kind of the history and politics of Guam, as well as some of the culture and experiences of our people. And so after I finished my MFA degree, I attended University of California, Berkeley, to study comparative ethnic literature. And really that was a way for me to just learn more about our culture and history and identity, and to put it in conversation with other ethnic and minority groups. And that was also, of course, a time where I met you and other really inspiring Chamoros in California. And that made me even further want to connect, stay connected to and just strengthen my understanding of the Marianas and of Chamorro experiences. In 2011, I moved to Hawaii to take a teaching job at the university there. And I taught for 12 years there in the English department, focusing on creative writing, Pacific Islander literature, and environmental poetry. I resigned from that position last year and moved to San Diego, where I now teach ethnic studies at Miracosta College. So that's a little bit about, where I was born, where I grew up, my education and work background, and really what led me to do the kind of writing I do today.
No, Sidus Masi, and dispensa my internet may cut out because the internet still my internet still isn't that great even after Typhoon Mawar. Dispensa I think for my internet, kadagwa utsanay, every time it rains, the internet slows down. Life in the islands. But no, thank you for sharing that. And so, I think for many people, their introduction to you is your Unincorporated Territory series, which you've continued over several books. I remember when I first started teaching at UOG, having students buy and then read from your Hatsa book, which had the sort of the very iconic, like red on the cover, which students were sometimes very like drawn to, like Hafa Este, what is this? And then as you continued on, each had sort of a different theme. For example, the Lukau was one which struck me. Omelet, a more recent sort of addition to that. And so can you tell me about sort of this Unincorporated Territory series? Because I think your work is something which for many people, especially when I read others who are engaging with Chamorro history, with Chamorro politics outside of the Marianas, your work is often something that they're turning to in terms of quoting it and citing it. And so, talk to us, por favor, about the Unincorporated Territory series.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reading and teaching my works over the years. Yeah, so that first book was what I wrote for my master's thesis. And, as I mentioned, when I entered that program, my goal was to write a poetry book about Guam and Chamorro experiences. And so, I had 2 years to work on that manuscript and, decided to title it From Unincorporated Territory, because I was writing about what it meant to be from an unincorporated territory like Guam. And so that's where the title came about. And, to be honest with you, like after 2 years, And I finished that book, but I still had so many stories to tell, so much more history and politics and issues around environmental justice and so on, that I wanted to address. And so that's when I kind of came up with the idea to make this into a book series, not just have to tell all of our history, all of our story in one single book, which of course, our culture and our history is so rich that it can never truly be contained, in a single volume. And so, uh, for me, that first book was just a first attempt to write some of these stories and to see if I could, find a publisher and get the book into the world. Part of that, desire too comes from my own studies in literature, where I spent, most of my college years studying other people's literature, because Pacific Islander stories, were never taught in schools in the U.S. When I was going through my education. And so, I wanted to finally, write a book about Guam and our experiences, and to see if I could, share that story to a larger audience.
And so tell us about, so it was interesting because at the beginning it was Hatsa and then of course it was numbers, right? Ancient numbers. But then it moved to other themes. And so Lukao and then Amud. And then actually Amud is right here next to my desk.
Nice.
And so I found that to be kind of I found that shift to be very interesting. Um but what I loved about it, and it when I would teach teacher poems to students, what was always very fascinating was that at first students on Guam would be very resistant to it for for the reasons that sometimes people resist poetry because roses are red, violets are blue. I don't know how to write a poem because I have to rhyme, don't I? You have to rhyme poems, right? And so, or because this assumption that a poems are like this and they have to be like this. A poem either has to be Shakespeare, which is alienating, and I don't like it. Tizahuesti, tiguahuano, or a poem is just this romantic Hallmark card thing, which is not where I'm at either. And maybe I feel like that sometimes. Maybe I feel like that when I want to tell my loved one, I want to call into the radio and give a shout out to my loved one, but I'm not like that right now. I'm dealing with colonization, I'm dealing with militarization. And so at first, like it was funny because when I would bring not just your poetry, but other poetry to students, they would kind of feel like this isn't poetry. I remember for example, one of your poems from one of your books that had like comments from like DEIS, draft environmental impact statement comments. So people who had responded to the military buildup and the negative, the critical, the oppositional comments that they had given about more military coming to Guam and how it made them afraid, it made them angry, it made them worried. And students were like, this isn't poetry, you know? And so, but I appreciated this because it was, for me though, it was poetry, which, I was used to reading in the voices of others and the context of others, but it was pushing the boundaries. It was more avant-garde. It was free. It was more critical, but it was also very Chamorro. And so I wanted to ask you about that though, because from the unincorporated series and then in your other poems, you are pushing sort of the assumed boundaries or the assumed expectations that many people have, including many of our own people have about what a poem is supposed to be, what poetry is supposed to be, whether it is sort of the monologues of Juan Mala, you know, the sort of the that make him sound very interesting, that make him sound like this. I love the monologues of Juan Mala, like the sort of the discourses on spam, that sound, the ruminations on Matapang, sort of the reflections on your connections to your your grandparents, like your family, like so all of these things are mixed in there. And so I wanted to just ask for you to comment on that though, as somebody who, for at least for Chamorros is part of you and other Chamorros are just pushing our own boundaries in terms of what a poem can be.
Yes, indeed, there are so many stereotypes and expectations put on poetry and many of the arts as well, that really discourage people from, I think, engaging in more diversity and more kind of wider range of what's possible in terms of the arts. Now, for my particular poetry, I definitely write in a more experimental, avant-garde, and postmodern style. And partly that was, the poetry that I studied in school that I first fell in love with. And so, those became my major influences, and kind of, certain techniques really appealed to me as an experimental artist. Um, at the same time, it felt really appropriate for my own experiences, being from Guam and being Chamorro, which is to say that, I did often feel fragmented. I felt like there was a lot of blank spaces in my memory and in my own cultural education because of colonialism. And so, for me, poetry is about, finding a language and a form to embody those emotions. And so, that's why that kind of postmodern, post-colonial literary tradition really felt like an interesting way to tell my story. Um, Similarly, I think a lot about various kinds of Chamorro aesthetics, like housing design, canoe architecture, and other kinds of weaving and so on, that really inspired some of the stylistic and technical choices in the poetry. Now, unfortunately, in some ways, it makes the poetry much more difficult to read and to understand at times. But that's, to me, is part of poetry's power, right? That it defamiliarizes your imagination and it encourages you to think more deeply and to imagine more expansively. And to me, that's also a very decolonial and indigenous method. I think so much of our culture and so much of the practice and process of decolonization is about transforming our imaginations and learning a new way of understanding and perceiving the past and imagining the future. And so, you still got to teach the poems in the classroom, and of course, it can create pedagogical challenges. But to me, that's also what education is all about. Struggling together in the classroom to understand complex phenomena, like literature, like storytelling and narrative and so on. And so, it's definitely been grateful that educators like you have taken the challenge to teach my work, and that students, on Guam and across the world have really engaged with my work, even though it can be very difficult.
Oh no, no, so just must say, I think it's fun. I think it's fun. I always like, I always enjoyed, I always enjoyed really challenging students to think outside the sonnet, you know,
That'd be a good
and then,
T-shirt. Think outside the sun.
oh yeah, okay. So somebody write that down. It's not a particularly. I know Chamorros love to make T-shirts. It's not a particularly Chamorro T-shirt, but somebody's cousin is going to make that T-shirt. And so now, with this in mind, because let's we need to get into sort of the spam of things. We need to talk about we definitely need to talk about spam. And so let's uh let's oh, hold on one second. Here we go. Let's listen to a poem
Are you going to
from
embarrass me
you.
with an old video of me?
This is definitely this is just from 7 years ago. So it's not as old as some of the videos. So yes, this is it's when before the episode started. hold on 1 second. Why is this not working? Okay, hopefully this works. Let me just double check it. It wasn't wanting to share the sound for this. Okay. But oh yes, I was just teasing because, as we get older, there's, especially with the internet, there's more and more out there. So there's like videos of Craig like from 15 years ago on YouTube. And so that's like, oh man, you could find videos of me 15 years ago on YouTube. Ouch. And so I don't know. I don't know. Let my kids find those. Let my kids play those at my funeral if they want to tease me.
I was going to say your biographers will find them useful.
Oh man. But at this point, now that I am 44, almost to the middle of my 40s, the main thing I'm worried about is my hairline. That's the thing I'm worried about, is that people will be able to judge my hairline and use AI to sort of track my hairline or something, or when will Bavakwa completely lose his hair?
Oh my God.
And which just kidding.
Well, I'm 44 okay. Too, and I ain't got to worry about my hairline.
But okay, so here we go. Spam's carbon footprint. If you can't hear the audio because there was an issue, I can try it again.
This next poem is a poem of desire. And it does require a little bit of audience participation, or I should say, desire your participation for this poem. So throughout this poem, I need you to whisper aloud or sign, spam. Spam. Try it with me. Spam. Keep going. Spam's carbon footprint. Guam is considered the spam capital of the world. On average, each Chamoru consumes 16 tins of spam each year, which is more per capita than any other country. Welcome to Guam, where all 7 McDonald's restaurants feature spam on the menu. A culinary legacy of American troops stationed in the Pacific during World War II, spam is also popular in Hawaii, the Philippines, South Korea, and all places with the history of U.S. military presence. In fact, some historians argue that spam may have been responsible for Hitler's defeat. The Allies would have started without spam, plus it's processed, so I guess we can save it for the coming war between the US and China, and or Russia, and or North Korea, and or black people, and or students. Wow, I haven't seen this much spam since I lived in Guam, and the car dealership there started offering a 50-pound bag of rice with every car purchase. You can rub the entire block of spam, along with the accompanying delicious gelatinous goo, onto your wood furniture. The oils from the spam moisturize the wood and give it a nice luster. Plus, you'll have enough spam jelly left over to use as your own personal sexual lubricant. Once I was on a diet and spam faded from my consciousness. Then I met my future wife, who's Hawaiian, and spam became part of my life again. A true Pacific romance. Maybe the economic downturn will help people truly appreciate spam instead of loathing it. Spam doesn't have to be unhealthy. I eat spam every day and I'm not dead. Despite rumors, spam is not made of such odds and ends as hooves, ears, brains, native people, or whole baby pigs. The name itself stands for Specially Processed Army Meal. Salted pork and more. Super pink artificial meat. Snake, possum, and mongoose. Or some poets are mediocre. For example, Kenneth Goldsmith. My uncle is the reigning Guam spam king. He won the last spam cook-off with his spicy spam meatballs. I'll never forget the 2-pound spam bust of George Washington he made for Thanksgiving. Toasted crispy on the outside with raw egg yolk in the hollow center, the kids loved it. All I want for Christmas is a snow globe featuring a can of Spam sitting on an island. Turn it over and a typhoon swirls madly, unable to unseat Spam from its place of honor. I have a souvenir can of Spam I bought after seeing Monty Python's Spam-A-Lot on Broadway in New York City. It cost me $10 and is the most expensive Spam I've ever bought. I will never eat it. Mahalo, thank you.
Okay, so talk to us. You've already said a lot about Spam in that piece, but talk to us about so I mean, what I loved about your pieces on Spam is sort of that it is, Spam is this beast, but it is like it's this thing which is integral, but it's deadly. It's this important part of the family and the culture, but it is deadly at the same time. And so, but your poetry and your engagement sort of on Spam were just, brought out a lot of those contradictions about Spam, whether it's history and also its place in the present as well. And so I wanted to kind of hear more about that.
Yes, well, thanks again for replaying that poem and for bringing up those those pieces. Part of me writing about Spam, I think that poem appears in my third book, was again just a desire to write about Chamoru experiences, and so much of our experiences revolve around food, and obviously not only our traditional foods, but also, of course, imported colonial foods as well, like Spam. And so, I wanted to write a series of poems for that book, focusing on, what I call the holy trinity of canned meats, which is Spam, corned beef, and Vienna sausages. So that's the holy trinity. Spam, of course, at the top. And so, Spam and of course, those other, food items I mentioned, are not only delicious and deadly, as you put it, but also are so deep in meaning as well. Right? Food is not just something we eat; it's something that's entangled, with the environment, with, as I mentioned, colonialism, militarism in the case of Spam, and of course, capitalism as well. And so, thinking about, not just how Spam tastes, but what are all its deeper meanings. And so, to me, that led me to writing those poems. I've written about other foods like soy sauce, red rice, kelaguen, and more. And so, I even have taught a class for many years on food literature, thinking about food as a major theme and subject and symbol through which we express our cultural ideas and customs and beliefs. And so, food is a great way for us to talk about more difficult issues like colonialism and more complicated issues like culture.
No, Sidus Masin. And then what has the response been? Especially from Chamorros if they've heard sort of your colorful critiques, your gelatinous jibes against the pink goo, just because I don't know if we could call Spam a sacred cow, because that feels like we are mixing meat metaphors. But so just because I think it's one of those things where like people who, because you go to the doctor and they say, oh, you're like, oh my goodness, my gout is so bad, oh my diabetes is so bad. Well, you better stop eating this and you better stop eating that. And then, you're taking your aunt or your uncle home, and then where do they want to eat? They want to eat exactly those things that maybe the doctor said they're not supposed to eat. And so, what is the response that you've gotten, about those sorts of things? Because, sacred cow is the metaphor that comes to mind. But Have people pushed back or responded to the way that you've talked about spam?
Well, you definitely made me laugh a lot. In talking about this issue, and I think that's maybe one more thing I should bring up is that so much of food is tied into humor, and so much of my favorite indigenous literature includes a kind of trickster, humorous, subversive element to it. And of course, that's the reason why I kind of wrote these poems as monologues in the voice of kind of Juan Malo, thinking about his own use of subversive humor and tricks to kind of challenge and critique colonial power. And so for me, that was kind of the approach I took to at least this spam poem in particular. And just like spam itself, that poem is a crowd pleaser. Everything, even though it is a mouthful to perform, everyone really loves the poem and finds it disgusting at the same time. And that's part of what I wanted those food poems to do is to both make the listener or the reader salivate a little bit, but then also feel disgusted, because I want to ruin our colonial appetite so that we can perhaps someday move towards a more decolonial diet. But what's interesting, it's been fun reading it to Chamorro and Pacific Islander audiences, because they have that same like deep emotional connection to spam, since it's very popular in our islands. But it's been surprising to read it to, for example, Native American audiences. I performed at reservations and in other tribal spaces. And, they have spam in their cultures as well, similar colonial history, similar dietary issues today, and similar feelings of nostalgia and love for this sacred meat, as you put it. At the same time, I've read it to many, white American audiences and diverse audiences. And it's crazy. Afterwards, everyone would, or not everyone, but a lot of people at every show would like share their own spam stories with me from their own family and their own culture. I recently performed it in Minnesota, which is, of course, the birth state of spam. And
spam country.
Yeah, and I was only, maybe like 20 miles away from the spam factory and spam museum. So the people who were listening to it, they're all Americans, but they knew spam as well. So it was cool to see their reaction by learning how far spam has traveled and how it has become so embedded or digested into faraway places and peoples.
Oh, Biba. No, so just Masi for sharing that. Now we're gonna shift a little bit. We're gonna shift a little bit because away from spam to something I wanted to, because a lot of your poetry, a lot of your work engages with issues of climate, environment, ecosystems, and so on. And so one of the favorite pieces that I always like to teach and share with students was the praise song for Oceania. I always thought that was a really strong piece, and good and really important even for Pacific Islanders. I always think it was something powerful to share with anybody, but powerful even for Pacific Islanders to really think that we live near the ocean. We have a stronger connection potentially to the ocean than your average person in the world. But what does that mean? What does it mean? Does it just mean that you get to take more selfies near the ocean? Is that all it means for people today and so I that was always and because of the way that poem used religious sacred language around something in the natural world that students were familiar with, it was a good way to extend. Well, what would happen if the way that you think about God, you extended it to something like the ocean as something sacred, holy? Isn't that what we're talking about? And so I always appreciated that one. But I want to actually talk about a different piece, and or talk about something a little bit different, because there's something all over KOAM and Instagram, there's been so much news about the Sihik.
Yeah.
There's been so much news lately about the Sihik because the Sihik recovery program in Palmyra Atoll, and it's so cool because they used to give when they were, Chamorro birds that were in the States being cared for, they used to give them names like Jeff and Doris. I'm glad they give them Chamorro names now. And I feel like the birds are happier too. A lot of them look really dudus, they look real happy. They look like they're ready to go to the Micronesian Mall. And so, this is a short, just a short piece from Bird Note. And so let's listen to it. And then I want you can talk specifically about sort of, the birds, because this is something that, creative voices, such as yourself, it's something that, you want to refer to because it's something that is lost. You don't hear them anymore. You can't see them in the same way that our parents or our grandparents could. And so it's a rich thing. It's a must for us to tell stories of the birds because you can't see and hear them anymore. It's like you have to. And so let's listen first, and then I want to hear about sort of this from your perspective, who's always incorporating ecosystems and sort of our native species, our native environment into your work.
This is Bird Note. Craig Santos Perez grew up on the island of Guam and later moved to Hawaii, where his children were born. Both are places that once flourished with unique and diverse bird life, but because of invasive species and climate change, have seen so much loss and extinction. That heart-wrenching fact was also complicated for Craig as a dad.
My eldest daughter really loves birds, and she's born and raised in Hawaii. So I wanted to write a poem bringing together my concerns as a father, as an environmentalist.
Here's an excerpt from Craig's poem, The Last Safe Habitat.
I don't want our daughter to calculate how many miles of fencing is needed to protect the endangered birds that remain. I don't want her to realize the most serious causes of extinction can't be fenced out. I want to convince her that extinction is not the end. I want to convince her that extinction is just a migration to the last safe habitat on Earth. I want to convince her that our winged relatives have arrived safely to their destination, a wondrous island with a climate we can never change, and a rainforest fertile with seeds and song.
You can hear the full poem on our website, birdnote.org. I'm Mark Bramhill.
Okay. Put for what, talk more. You can talk specifically about that poem or just in general, kind of about this approach because I have seen a number of articles by scholars, from elsewhere, talking about sort of the environmental dimensions in your work.
Yes, well, thank you for playing the excerpt. I'd highly recommend that program, Bird Note, for anyone out there who's interested in the environment. It's a very powerful program. So that poem appears in my book, Habitat Threshold, which was published in 2020. And it's a collection of what people call eco-poetry. And it's often defined as poetry about nature, the environment, ecology, animals, climate change, environmental justice, and so on. And so, that's been a major concern, from my very first book, because you can't write about Guam without, writing about the environment, because it's an island and, you're always surrounded by the ocean. There's, so many beautiful ecologies in our homelands. And so that was always part of my work. And, unfortunately, though, more recently, I've been, writing about climate change and extinction, because these issues, have become much more to the foreground of, our conversations about environmentalism. And then, of course, the environment is such a core part of Chamorro identity and genealogy as well. And so, that's kind of the reasons why I explore these themes in my work. And, writing about birds, especially, native birds of the Marianas, because I never really got to experience or engage with them. I was born in 1980, and by the late 80s, most of the birds have been taken from the wild. And so I have no memories of any of our wild native birds. So I've, as an academic, studied, the species survival project and what had been going on with all the birds in the zoos. I even followed, many of the zoos to just keep track of what was happening, and it's been really inspiring to see, this first release of the Sihek into the wild. And so it's a moment, where I feel a lot of hope. And at the same time, it's hard not to mourn all the birds that did not survive. And, to think about kind of the deeper meanings of extinction, right? What happens when a species is taken from the earth? What is lost, is much deeper than just, than just an animal or just a being. It has so many more cultural significances. And of course, there are, ecological reverberations when species are taken from the environment. And so, for me, this is, a very important issue. I teach environmental literature as well. I also edited an anthology on Pacific Islander eco-literatures because so many of our storytellers, have been trying to reckon with the loss of species throughout the Pacific. And of course, many of our storytellers are, trying to articulate the complex human-animal relations that we have cultivated throughout our histories. And so for me, it's an important topic. It's an important part of my identity and my politics as well.
No, seduce mase. Seduce mase. And no, pareho na dos na. I don't have many memories of native birds. I mean, the first time that I have real memories of a sihik or a koko bird or a totur are like in the San Diego Zoo.
Me too.
And so it's like
I can relate to that.
And so and that's why even for for me in the Guam bus, we it's kind of funny because we made like a set a flashcard set for native birds. And people are like, oh, you should do flashcard sets for this and for that. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do one on birds because, we don't know about many of these birds anymore. And so how else are you going to know about them? And so it's interesting because it's our least, like it's our worst selling deck but that's the reason that at least for me and my brother's like, oh man, no one's going to buy this. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. We're gonna make it anyways. But yeah, I think what I like about what I really like about the ways, that in thinking back across several of, you're from Unincorporated Territory series. It's funny because even in just our conversation today, where I was just remembering a lot of the feedback that I'd get from students about how, oh, this doesn't look like a poem or this doesn't sound like a poem and so on. A lot of it is just students not being used to like the type of poetry, like poetry that is a little bit more abstract or found poetry, conceptual poetry, and so on. But thinking thinking about what working at the museum, one of the things that I like opening up one of the books though is sometimes in the museum, you open up a box that's in our collection and then it hasn't been opened in a while and you don't know what's in there. And there might be sort of like some artifacts in there. There might be like some documents in there. But then sometimes when I open up your books, it's like that. There's like, you might find like something that's it's just all these recollections, fragments. There's treasures in there. There might be things that are incomplete, and people come across them and they're like, man, I don't know where this comes from. And but that's also part of it too, is that it's just like this collection. And in a sense, the fact that people may be kind of confused, like, where does this all fit? That's for me, that's always been part of it too, is that you put all of this stuff together, and it's not supposed to be neat and kind of tidy, because it's not neat and tidy. It's kind of like a drawer of all of these things that are troubling, that are sacred, that are special, you know. And so that's what I like about it, is going from page to page in some of these books, is that there'll be like a quote from a historical document, like and then there'll be like something like a memory of like you and your grandmother, and then there'll be a rumination on spam, and then it'll just be like it'll be like this fascinating collection of all of these things put together. And so it for me, working in like the museum, it reminds me of just opening up a box, and then just seeing all of these important things, and then just knowing that they're all important parts of our past, but sifting through it, trying to make sense of where they all come together.
I think that's a
And
beautiful way to
so,
put it. I was going to say,
oh yeah,
so much
go
of
ahead, dispense.
yeah, so much of the poetry I love is an invitation to active reading. And to me, active reading is all about just what you said, kind of entering into a text or artwork or even a song, with a kind of open spirit of discovery. And and I often think about reading in Pacific terms, think about reading, as Vince Diaz has taught us, as a kind of navigation. And, so to me, when, you can start a poem or open a book, you're on a journey, and you're navigating the words and the silences, and the different images and so on. And, I often think about, poems as islands too. And so you could think about a collection as an archipelago of texts, of stories. And so, to me, navigating the way through, and we'll get lost sometimes and disoriented and not sure if we're going the right way. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get to our destination. And, to me, that, also embodies so much of the Chamorro experience, and just so much of life itself, right? Is trying to figure out how to navigate, who we are and where we come from, and to, think about where we're going.
Oh, Seduce Masi. Now, let's get to the National Book Award. Let's get to that now, because, man, what's it called? That was when you won that, man. There's like, hey, there's a Chamorro on stage with LeVar Burton. And then got so many people like messaging me, hey, Miguel, hey, Doc, you know who this is? And I'm like, yeah. It's a bearded Chamorro guy. Of course I know who it is. Of course. Like, I know almost all bearded Chamorro men. We have a club. We have a group.
Hey, it's a
Since
secret.
the pandemic,
why are you talking about
it? But we will meet on Mount Lam Lam at the time when the time is right. But
you're carrying the crucifix, not me.
But and so I want to, this was a powerful moment, just because I think we've seen a huge sort of explosion of Chamorro literature in so many ways. I think if you had asked, especially, you may have the same sort of experience growing up. Most Chamorros did not think of themselves as a literature people. They did not think that they were people that had a lot of books, that they had a lot of writers. There were writers for sure. There was people who wrote histories, there was scholars, There was a few books that were out there, like Mariquita, and even my aunts who made some of like the first sort of children's books, like in the 80s that went out there, the Island Cousins series. But on a wider scale, Chamorros didn't really think of themselves in that way. That was kind of my experience growing up. If you said like, "Oh, I'm gonna make children's books," people, ni nakita ni tauta, people would be like, "What? Why?" Let the Americans do that, or let the others do that, because the purpose of the Chamorro is to join the military or to tend to the barbecue. We make the finadeni, we make the kelaguen, we serve in the military. Somebody's got to find a new way to make spam that will capture the imaginations of the world.
Vegan
Writing
spam.
books. Oh yeah, writing books is not us. And so, but we've seen like a shift where there's, UOG Press puts out books. There's more into people who self-publish now. There's more people that are writing, scholarly stuff, but creative stuff. And so what's it called? When you won the National Book Award last year, I think it was exciting. I think it was a big introduction, and I think more and more Chamorros were ready for it and primed for it because it was something that had been growing. The seeds had been planted. And so that's why, yeah, I got so many people. There's so many conversations from people who were touched by your speech, by your comments. And so I want to give
This is the second book in an ongoing series of work collected.
hold on a second. Why is this? Nope. Hold on. Somebody's.
With all those.
There it is. Yes, YouTube. You're the way you play reels is funny. It is. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. Let's just listen to an excerpt because I know that when you read this poem, for a lot of people who even had that experience that you talk about in the Pacific written tradition, it was like a mirror that made them realize that it was actually something that they had experienced, that they had just never even thought about. It was like this out of body reflective experience. And so
names I want to share this poem. It's called The Pacific Written Tradition. I returned home to Guam for the first time after 15 years away and visit an English class at one of Guam's public high schools. As I read aloud from my new book, I notice a student crying. "What's wrong?" I ask. She says, "I've never seen our culture in a book before. I just thought we weren't worthy of literature." How many young islanders have dived into the depths of a book only to find bleached coral and emptiness? We were taught that missionaries were the first readers in the Pacific because they could decipher the strange signs of the Bible. We were taught that missionaries were the first authors because they possessed the authority of written words. Today, studies show that Islander students read and write below grade level. It's now, with all those names.
And so I wish we had time. I'm going to put the link for the whole speech so that people who are tuning in can watch the whole thing, as well as a link to listen to you reading the whole poem. But I wanted to get, your thoughts on the whole experience of winning that. And it's okay. We're coming up on the hour, but we can go over a little bit. But yeah, just share what it was like to win that. And then also specifically that poem. Because you have many poems, you could have read many poems, but sort of what made you choose that poem in particular?
Yes, thank you for sharing that and for your previous comments. I just want to briefly, also agree with you about the kind of blossoming of Chamorro literature. A lot of my dissertation is about this very topic, and my first academic book called Navigating Chamorro Poetry. Where I was able to both dig into the archives of Chamorro literature and try to map and track, all these new publications coming out in the last 10 to 15 years. And so it's really exciting to be part of, both a rich Chamorro literary tradition as well as, all the new voices that are emerging. With that said, when the source of that poem comes from me going back home for the first time in 2010. Migrated in 1995 and didn't return until 15 years later. And I returned, through an invitation from the Guam Humanities Council, who, brought me back to be part of their community conversations on the military buildup. And my second book had also been published that year. And so it was really nice to come home again to launch my new book and to, be part of the conversation. I got to visit one of Guam's public high schools and read my poetry, taught literature to the students. And there was one student, who started crying. And afterwards, I asked her what was wrong. And she said that she'd never seen our culture in a book before. And then she said, I just thought we weren't worthy of literature. And that line from her really struck deeply because, that was my experience growing up there too, but I had never put it in that way. And I feel like that's something that a lot of colonized people experience, where, we grow up in these colonial education systems that never teach us our own histories and literatures. And so, we grow up often feeling disempowered and invisible. And so, for me, writing our stories and, editing and publishing, Pacific literature in general, it's really, really a way for me to, to honor our stories and to, provide sources of inspiration to the next generation so that they can also tell our other stories. Because as I said, earlier in this conversation, right, no single book can tell the entire Chamorro story. And so we need, all our storytellers, all our musicians and artists, to continue articulating, the spectrum of Chamorro identity, as you put it. And so being able to, accept the National Book Award, the most prestigious literary award in the United States, and to read that poem based on, visiting, one of our high schools and engaging with that student, was really fulfilling and very quite surreal. I honestly almost didn't go to the ceremony because I didn't think I would win and didn't want to travel all that way, just to go home empty-handed. And so I almost didn't go, but I was, when I finally did go, I didn't prepare a speech. I was like, I'm just going to enjoy this ceremony, have a good time in New York City for a weekend and just enjoy the process. And so I went up there totally unprepared. I didn't know what I was going to say. My book was on the table, so I grabbed it. I was like, let me just read this last poem. It was very improvisational. Honestly, Miguel, if I even thought I would win, I would at least brought the Guam flag with me, kept it in my tuxedo and busted it out on stage like I'm at the Olympics or something. But like I said, I honestly, there's never been, someone like me on that stage before. And so it just didn't seem possible. But the fact that it did happen, to me just, again, speaks to the importance for us, for all Chamorros and Pacific Islanders to just honor our stories, honor our people, honor where we come from, and to use our voices to, speak our truths and to stand up for what we believe in.
No, Jesus Mase. No, thank you for sharing that. That was for for off the cuff. Yeah, it was very, it was very good. Bonito, bonito pedamo. And so it was I think it was yeah, it was special. It was as I said, I got, I think especially what I always tell people is, what we do, there's always this emphasis on the youth. We do things for the youth, but we also want to help our elders as well. And so what I found is that, of course, for younger people, the world is different. the world is ahead of them. But what I found to be so powerful was older people who heard that poem and connected it to their own experiences and realized that it was talking about them. And it reminded me about when I would do interviews with like Chamorros who, for example, went to, left island to go to school in like California in the 60s, and then would see like African American students, Chicano students, Native American students, Asian American students who were getting into ethnic studies, getting radicalized. And then at first they would instinctively look at them and say, oh man, what are these people doing? And then eventually they would talk to them and then they would realize, oh, that's me. What they're talking about, this is also me. Like and so it was, it's kind of like I hate to say it, but when you have like you like your Fox News uncle, your Fox News Chamorro uncle or your auntie who's like, oh man, damn those brown people who are coming in and invading the United States and ruining the bloodlines of and it's like, holy Lanya, uncle, if Trump blinked, he would want to send you back to Mexico too. I mean, and so because several, like for my Chamorro classes, for example, there's some students who are like in their 60s or who are like trying to learn the language because they heard it growing up, but then never learned to speak it. And so for them to hear it and then for them to kind of shed tears to hear your poem and then to realize and then to think, so like, I remember one of my students who's in her late 60s who talked about she was crying and then she was just like, I feel like my grandmother, she could have had a book about her life, something, and just feeling that power because, and so, it was, so you winning that award was an important moment, not just for the young people, we always look to them, but also just so that even the generation past can help understand what they went through, or even the sort of some of the issues in their own experiences. That was actually my favorite was, yeah, young people. I'm getting older, so I taught, young people. I have mixed feelings on young people as I join the Manamku Club. Each day I get closer to the Manamku status. As I get closer to being able to join the Manamku line at the DMV. But but anyways, but yes, so I want to give you because we are over time now, but I wanted to give you sort of a last chance here. If you want to share sort of what are you working on sort of next? What do you have planned in the future? Yeah, anything that we can look forward to.
Yes, well, thanks for those comments, and I definitely agree with what you said. I felt so much pride coming from my relatives, and after the book award, and even after my books have been published, my grandparents, would tell me how proud they were to see their stories in a book, in literature, and because I think books and literature have that aura to them, right? They're still considered sacred objects like spam, but not only sacred objects, but when our stories are listened to, whether it be in a book or spoken, we feel visible and empowered and dignified and proud, and we have that feeling that our stories matter. And I'll never forget when my first book came out. I had interviewed my grandfather, wrote about his experiences, and when he read the published book for the first time, and I saw him, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, he's really proud of me, and that he said they could never take our stories away from us. And for me, hearing that from someone from Guam's greatest generation, so-called the World War II generation, really did bring home, once again, the importance of stories. Speaking of, I guess some of the new projects I'm working on to revolve around stories, and lots of prose stories. And so I'm working on a memoir right now, and trying to find it is going really slowly, but hopefully I'll make some progress the rest of this year. I'm also putting together a short story, speculative fiction collection, and then hoping to write a novel after that. Also working on my second academic book on Pacific Islander eco-poetry. Then editing several projects related to Chamorro literature, multilingual literature, and Pacific literature. So I'm working on like 10 different books right now, but like I said, everything moves really slow. So hopefully maybe in a couple of years, at least one of these books will come out. We'll see.
Biba. No, Sedus Masi. Hey, Sedus Masi Craig. Sedus Masi for Parifina Topmo. I've gotten some messages thanking you. One of the messages says, I definitely got emotional hearing your speech. I was so proud to see a Chamorro up on that stage. Sedus Masi for paving the way. And then one of my older Zoom students says, heart emoji, heart emoji. You know, I am one of those Chamorros who felt that. You know, talking about sort of one of those people who felt that your written Pacific, the poem that you read helped her understand her experience and sort of the lack of identity growing up. And so, and then Senora Lillian says, congratulations, Craig, on winning the National Book Award, Biba. Ay, de sidus masiham zutoros. And Aide Hungen. And so it's always good to catch up with you. I'm glad I got to see you in person a few weeks ago, and then I'm glad I get to see you in Zoom now.
Yes, it's always great to see you, and you've been, you know, an inspiration to me for many years, and just really grateful for all the work you've done to support me, and of course to support our community. And so hopefully you'll have some time to rest and relax as well, since I know how hard you work for the culture and for the people. And so just want to say thank you as well.
Aide. Hey, Hago mas. And si Diyos mas tatlo no Hago, talo na puri finatok mo gwini para sa episode. Za para hamzo todos ni Omega para umekungok esti ifinakpo esti episode Fanachu.